Okay, great. Plenty of people popping in, so thank you all for joining us. Just to kick us off here, my name is Marnie Platt, and as I mentioned, my co-host and our main speaker today is Cindy Steiner, and we're going to be talking about PrEP, a simple but very powerful communication tool that you can start using right away. So congratulations for taking advantage of your quarantine time, if you're on self-quarantine or just lockdown, like both of us are, to learn something useful. So, quick introduction of myself. I am an author, a speaker, and a corporate executive, and I've spent the last 25 years of my career taking complex messages, complex topics, and communicating them in very simple terms to people who maybe don't have the same technical background. So PrEP is one of the tools that I use, and it's been very successful. And Cindy is an international communications coach who specializes in helping CEOs and senior leadership from startups, particularly in tech areas, to pitch for money to venture capital. So they have the same issue of taking complex messages and having to communicate them crisply and clearly to people who don't have the same background. Now, with her help and the PrEP tool, Cindy's clients have raised over $1 billion. So clearly this is a tool that works, and trust us, it's easy and you can do it too. Now, just a little bit of logistics before we get started. The webinar is going to run for about 45 minutes. There will be some time in here for you to practice. So if you haven't already, grab a pencil and paper or your favorite screen that you like to take notes on, and be prepared to jot down some thoughts, because we will then ask you to include them in the chat box. And you can also put questions into the chat box. And as those come up, I will bring them forward to Cindy, or if it's not an appropriate time, I will then bring them up at the end of the session. We will have a separate block of time for questions at the end as well. And after the webinar, we'll also be sharing some special offers with you that we have just for our webinar participants. So with that, I'm going to wish you a good webinar. Hope you'll learn a lot, and I'm going to hand you over to Cindy. Cindy, over to you.
Thanks, Marnie. Yes, as Marnie mentioned, I'm an international executive communications coach. A lot of my clients are engineers, scientists, financial professionals, and they often need to translate their thoughts into language that's understandable by a specific type audience that's not, just like Marnie mentioned, that's not with their background. So they need to translate, and so I help them translate their language into language that's understood by their target. And I have found over the years that this PrEP model I use a lot. And most of my clients, after I coach them with the PrEP model, they say, that's the biggest takeaway of the whole thing. So with that, let's get into it, Marty. Now, today's webinar gives you a tried and true model for organizing your thoughts on the fly and sounding like a real professional. The model is called the PrEP model, P-R-E-P, and we're confident that you'll find it key to facilitating concise, powerful messaging in a variety of situations. One such situation is the meeting that was supposed to last 30 minutes, and now 60 minutes have gone by, and there's still no end in sight. A case in point, recently I was involved in a board meeting where an architect was trying to get funding to put fans up in the building's attic. He started his talk with, "Let me explain why this is critical." Then for the next 20 minutes, he proceeded to explain how they would do this. I finally interrupted him when I looked around the room and saw people rolling their eyes and dozing off, looking at their iPhone. Said, "Hey, Jeff, you said you were going to tell us why this is critical, and you've spent the past 20 minutes telling us how it will be done. So why is it important?" And he replied, "It will dramatically reduce the heat in the offices on hot days, and therefore save us a lot of money on our air conditioning bill." If only he had heard of the PrEP model, which I'll introduce to you in a few minutes. We've all lived through these meetings, haven't we? That go on and on and on because one person loves to pontificate. They start talking and take themselves and all of us down a rat hole and forget what their message was and where they were going with it. Another example I had a client once, well, actually more than one client more than once, who was the master of TMI, too much information. During one of our coaching sessions, she started talking about her CEO, then her uncle, then her boss, and then she asked me, where was I going with this? Whereupon I answered, well, only you would know that. She got the point. So I created a little sign, a little card that I held up. I wrote TMI on this card. And every time she would start to do that, I would hold it up. And she finally started to get it and caught herself before she'd get going down that road. So today, we're going to share with you this very powerful organizational model that helps you be concise and convincing in your messaging so you can turn words into actions, the actions you want, and help you hear yes more often. Now, before I get into the model itself, let me give you the logic behind it. It involves deductive versus inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is when you give lots of details and support, and then you lead down to your conclusion. For example, engineers and scientists use this approach when explaining their findings to peers. They explain in detail their findings and research so that by the time they give you their conclusion, they've proved it to you. This logic flow often takes a long time and leads to a lot of questions on the how did you get there. The questions divert attention from the bottom line, the conclusion. I think the reason we call it the bottom line is because that's usually where we find it, at the end. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, starts with your conclusion up front, bottom line up front, and explains the why and then the how. This approach is much more efficient and works well for upper management. One of my high-tech engineer clients in Silicon Valley told me that their CEO always tells them that she wants to hear the solution up front. She's asking for inductive reasoning. This way of presenting a position can be a change from the norm. Some of my international clients, especially the French, struggle with this. They're proud of their 17th century Cartesian logic, whereby you present all your findings and research that lead down to the obvious conclusion at the end, deductive reasoning. For a while I was working near Paris with an American company whose European headquarters were in France. I discovered this big issue of logic flow when working with these executives. During video conferences with corporate headquarters in the US, the French would be 20 minutes into their well-prepared, bulletproof argument when an American executive would impatiently interject, "So, what's the point?" And they would reply, j'arrive, I'm getting there." So I explained to them that, with a bit of tongue-in-cheek, joking with them a bit, that US business executives want the conclusion up front. They would counter with, "But why would you listen to me if I tell you the conclusion up front?" But I answered, "Because I want to know how you got to that conclusion." It's faster to substantiate your conclusion when you stated it up front, because you're guiding your listeners down your logic path. And I joke that American business audiences want the conclusion up front because it saves time. And we Americans have lots of sayings about such things, like time is money. And of course we eat fast food. Faster is better. And I exaggerate and I show them on a board just what we've got here on this slide. Deductive reasoning on the left, inductive on the right. And I label it's a bit of an exaggeration, but I labeled deductive reasoning rest of world and inductive as US business case. And this is, of course, a big exaggeration, but it rings true often with people. They get it. And one is not necessarily better than the other. We go back to who are they talking to? So if they're scientists talking to scientists, they need to use deductive, engineers to engineers, and so on. So most important thing, though, before you even open your mouth is to determine who is your audience. And that's my next thing we're going to address on our agenda here is audience analysis. Who are the people I'm talking to? So you want to ask yourself, before you even open your mouth, consider who it is you're addressing. The first and most important step when you're trying to convince people is to analyze them. And here are 4 easy steps to do this. Just ask yourself these 4 questions, write down your answers, because writing them down actually helps anchor them in your mind as you prepare your request. So first of all, who are they? Number 2, what do they know or not know about your subject? 3, what do you want them to do? And 4, why? Very important and often omitted. Why should they care? Let's do it. I have an example. Let me share with you an example of when I coach CEOs on their investor presentations. They're presenting to potential investors. And when answering these 4 questions, they discover how best to frame their arguments to get what they want, money. So number 1, who are they? Investors. Number 2, what do they know or not know about your company? Usually not much. They saw the business plan, maybe your website. What do you want them to do? Invest in your company. And why should they care? Well, let's see, because you're going to show them the market potential, the innovative cutting edge technology or science you have to offer, the ROI, the return on investment, and the fact that you have a dynamic executive team with lots of relative experience. Another example is of audience analysis. So you're interviewing for a job at a large biotech company, and the interview includes HR, human resources, a couple of scientists, and a project manager. So who are they? A biotech company, HR, human resources representative, scientist, project manager. What do they know about you? Probably only what they saw on your resume if they really looked into it. What do you want them to do? Hire you. And why should they care? Because you have loads of experience in big pharma working on such projects and have successfully delivered time after time. So this is what you can get your whole head around, the audience analysis, before you get into opening your mouth.
So Cindy, before we go on, there's a really good question that's just come in.
Okay.
And that's, when you're doing audience analysis, is this something that you only have to do when you're speaking to people for the first time? Or should you do this every time you make a presentation, even if it's to people you know?
I would say every time, because it depends on what you're talking about, right? Because it might be the same audience, but it's a different, how do I convince those people of what I have to say this time? So I'd say every time.
Yeah, good question.
Good.
Okay.
This is a good question. Thank you. Now allow us to introduce you to the PREP model. PREP, a very powerful formula to help you persuade people to do what you want them to do or to believe what you want them to believe. Do you need to cut to the chase? Get to the point. Have you heard? Get the bottom line up front. PREP is your guide. It's used as an elevator pitch, a quick overview of a proposal or a project. In impromptu situations, it's wonderful. Answering questions, and even to, as we say, straddle the fence, so to speak, meaning when you don't want to give your position or when you don't have enough information to take a position. So it helps you organize your thoughts on the fly quickly and sound good. So here you go. P, the first one, position. You want to keep this tight too, really concise. So position, one sentence. Reason, one sentence. Example or brief explanation, a few sentences here. And then paraphrase your position at the end. To help buy time and organize your thoughts, you can always paraphrase the question, if this is the case, to ensure you are answering the question they're asking. You know how sometimes you've seen somebody answer a question and the person's going, what? That wasn't what I was asking. So paraphrasing will help buy time and help you make sure you're answering the right question. And then use the words again to help organize your thoughts. Buys time. My position on that is, period. The reason I say that, fill in the blank, period. Let me give you an example, or let me explain briefly. So that's why my position is, da-da. Real nice, tight formula. Now, let me give you an example, a first example we have here. You are a relatively new manager and have 6 direct reports. At least you did have 6 direct reports until 3 of them left all at the same time. 1 went on maternity leave, 1 quit, and 1 broke her ankle and needs surgery. So now you're managing 3 people and handling the work of 6. So you go to your boss and you ask for help. And this is a true story. This just happened to one of my clients a few months ago. So who are you addressing? Your boss. What does he know or not know about the subject? He's quite aware. What do you want him to do? Allow you to hire a temporary employee as soon as possible. And why should he care? Well, he doesn't want any more of your staff to leave for being overworked, and he wants the clients to continue to experience your excellent service to date. So now let's think about organize your thoughts using the PrEP model. Here we go. 1 sentence. We need to hire a temp ASAP, a temporary employee, as soon as possible. Reason. As of last Friday, we had 3 employees to do the work of 6 and 6 have been doing and that have been keeping all 6 of us extremely busy. For example, Melissa quit and will be interviewing to fill her position soon. But we can't hire someone for Janet, who is out on maternity leave, as she's expected to return. And we can't replace Jessica because of her ankle surgery, but we don't know when she'll be able to come back to work. So, as you can see, we really need to hire a temp ASAP, as soon as possible. I can contact the temporary agency today to get it started. Do you agree?
And of course, the manager says yes, because now they understand the implications.
You just,
I think a benefit of that too is that if you've got managers who nowadays say, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions.
Yes.
Your position is your solution in a situation.
There you go. Very good. That makes you look really good in your boss's eyes. Okay. Now here, I have another example for you here. We're at a 3-day business conference, and one evening, some of your colleagues want to go out to dinner, and you're included in the invitation. But they want to go to a Mexican restaurant, and you and Mexican food do not get along at all. So when analyze your audience, who are they? Some peers you know, and some acquaintances you don't know. What do they know or not know about you? Well, they don't know your aversion to Mexican food and assume that since everyone loves Mexican food, it's a safe choice. What do you want them to do? You want them to go and enjoy the Mexican food. And why should they care? Well, they would feel really bad if they knew that you went and couldn't eat any of the food. So organizing your thoughts using the PrEP model and a bit of humor, you go and enjoy the food, but I'll be opting out. I don't want to appear antisocial, and everyone I know loves Mexican food, but it doesn't love me. For example, chilies, peppers, onions, cilantro, even the chip dips, which usually include all the above, kill my stomach. Even the smell of all these simmering and steaming in the restaurant doesn't work for me. So you guys go enjoy, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning bright and early in the lobby. Now, let's have you do it. Let's have you think of it as an example here on slide 12. We've got an example for you. So you want to think about, imagine yourself at work asking your manager for a raise. Now, what do you want? What have you done to earn it? And what other reasons might you give him or her for them to grant your request? And you want to start, of course, with analyzing your audience and write out the answers to those 4 questions, just short, like right now. And then what you would do is write out the 4 steps of prep. But for time's sake today, we'll just have you write your position and the reason, okay? So we'll give you a couple, not minutes, but a little bit of time here to work on that.
All right, and when you've come up with a good position and reason, just go ahead and stick it in the chat box. I'm watching on another screen, and I will bring a good one forward.
Super.
Quiet for a sec here. Good, some thoughts starting to come in. Okay, here's an example I like, Cindy, because I think it's one that a lot of people can identify with. The position is I'm requesting a raise, so probably many of us have thought of having this conversation at one point or another. And the reason is that I've overperformed for the past 2 years. So Cindy, I'm going to take the liberty of turning this into a complete prep as an example, and then let's talk about it. So a prep might look something like this or sound something like this as you sit down with your boss. I'm requesting a raise. Over the past 2 years, I've consistently been your top sales performer, and I've exceeded both my sales and my profitability goals. I've also brought in 2 of our current top clients. Research in the market shows that I'm actually paid $15,000 below the ongoing rate for my role in this industry in this area. Therefore, I'm requesting a raise of $20,000 to reflect both the market standards and my performance. Cindy, what do you think of that example?
Love it.
Okay, let's talk about why it works as a prep.
Well, number one, the examples. You're giving evidence, you've done your homework. There you go.
Yeah, I think, and particularly if you're asking for a raise,
yes,
that can be uncomfortable, and you want to stay away from sort of mushy topics like I worked really hard. Because lots of people work hard, and the business cares about what you've delivered. So in any prep, you want to be fact-based, particularly when you're talking about asking for money. And I think it also helps your manager have the facts that she or he will need to justify your raise to HR or to their own manager. So
exactly.
Sometimes it's important to remember that even though someone looks like the decision maker for us, they may have another decision maker to satisfy. And by doing prep, you give them exactly the facts that they need to present to be able to support your request.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the examples, like you were just saying, Marnie, that's where you really sell your position, because that's the evidence that proves what you're saying, you deserve it. And also, kind of like Marnie said, you're using facts to substantiate this, so it takes away that so much uncomfortable feeling, because hey, this is fact. You can look it up on Google yourself. You know?
Yeah, and it helps a lot. And, you know, Cindy, I would suspect that this is a similar conversation to what you have with quite a few of your startup clients, right? Because that reason is exactly what you talked about in the introduction. It's, here are 3 good reasons why you should give my company $5 million. So it's got to be fact that's going to appeal to the decision maker.
Yes, got
Yeah.
the number there.
Super. So that was a really great example. So I'll thank
Yeah.
the person who sent that in, because I think it was really super. Shall we go ahead on?
Yep.
All right.
Okay. Now, that was the PrEP model. Now let us share with you some modifications of the PrEP model. Now, sometimes there's our PEP I'm going to tell you about, and there's PEP. There are different ways to use this model depending on the situation. So for the first one we're going to share with you, the RPEP, PEP, sometimes you know that if the first thing out of your mouth is your position, this particular audience will immediately be resistant and start interrupting you and giving you all the reasons this is a stupid idea. In such cases, it's best to start with your reason and then give your position. So you're just flip-flopping the PREP to RPEP. One example would be when your manager asks you about a project you've been working on for quite a long time now, quite several months now, and you know you'll never meet the deadline. It's best to start with your reason, because he'll listen to you. Reason: because we're short-staffed since Mary left the team, and because the manufacturing plant that makes the parts we need to finish the project's on strike, the project will not be done by end of month as previously planned, but we anticipate it won't be very much later. And my explanation: we have a new hire starting the first of the month who is very experienced and qualified to take over Mary's job. And we have reports that the strike should be over by month's end. Therefore, the project will be a bit late, but we anticipate it will be ready in plenty of time to launch our new product. See, we just switched the reason with the position to sneak into your position, justify it. Another example, this I have fun with often. Someone asks you a politically charged question or a challenging type question that you don't want to go there, okay? So here's one I've done before. Because I've heard several conflicting reports, there's my reason, I don't feel qualified to take a position at this time. There's my position. For example, Friday on my way home on the radio, I heard blah, 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 but Sunday in the newspaper, I read total opposite. Conflicting reports on what was happening there. So I don't feel qualified to take a position at this time. This works really well. I mean, you're not saying anything position-wise, but you're justifying why you're not going to go there. And most people will go, oh, yeah, I got it. So,
and I think it's kind of funny now, if you go back and look at some of the video clips from some of our better trained, more media savvy politicians around the world in the past couple of months as the whole coronavirus problem was starting. And we really didn't know a lot. And
right.
they were being asked, well, what are you going to do right now? Many of them were doing some version of this and saying, look, there's a lot of information coming out. We don't know if we should quarantine. We don't know how long we should take tests. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to have more information. Therefore, I will come back to you after I hear from this and that expert. Yeah. And that's really a version of our PEP. They're starting by saying, I can't answer now, and then saying, but here's what's going to happen and when I'll come back to you, and that's my position.
Exactly, exactly. Instead of giving all the fluff that we've been listening to, right? Trying to figure out and decipher.
So it's a real life example, and
it is. It really is. Yeah. I was just thinking that when I was giving my blank example, I was thinking exactly what we're going through right now.
Yeah. Should we let people try then for themselves?
Yeah, definitely. You guys go ahead and play with this. See what you can come up with. A delicate situation. We've all got one right here. And practice using your RPEP. So again, you can just do your reason, comma, position. It's just the first two parts, and share with us on the chat box.
Okay, and once again, scribble down a couple of notes when you have a reason and position that you like. Stick them in the chat box. I'm watching, and we'll give you a few seconds, and then I'll pick one, and we'll do it live together.
Perfect.
Okay. Ooh. Oh, there's one. There's a good one. There's a nice nightmare message to give your boss. So maybe we'll use this one. So you are in charge of managing stock, I gather, for your company out to stores. And one suggestion that's been made is, you're out of stock, and the one supplier that can get us the product is the one that your boss just had a fight with at your last management meeting. But still, they're the only ones who can keep your shelf filled. And it's a critical season. You need to be on the shelf with this product. So this is a really good one for RPEP. And if any of you have ever had to go in after a management meeting that didn't go that well and then have to keep things moving, this could be a very handy strategy. So an RPEP could look something like this when you talk to your boss. You start with, because Easter is next week, people expect to see chocolate in our stores now. And I recommend that we contact Lindt for resupply. They can resupply us starting in 2 days, and that's 3 days faster than any other company. They meet our need to get the customers the chocolate they expect faster than anyone else, and it's right before Easter. We don't have a lot of choices. So I recommend that we call them today. Cindy, what do you think of that?
I like it. But take your personal grudge out of there and just, solve the problem. Very good. Yeah. And I like the way you organized it. Yeah.
I think
perfect.
That's important part of this. When you're using RPEP to overcome an objection that you really expect, part of the audience analysis will help you understand whether you mention their objection or not. And in the scenario we had, I was picturing your CEO and the head of Lindt having had a massive knockdown argument. You really just didn't want to remind them of that. You want to keep them away from that emotional reaction. So don't mention it. There may be a different situation where you might bring it up, and then you might say, now I know you've got some concerns about Lindt. However, they are still the only ones who can get us product on the shelf in time. So in that bigger context, I'm recommending that we go with them.
Very good.
Audience analysis.
Yep. We want to make our customers happy.
So RPEP is a fun one. And then there's one more.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
And that's PEP, P-E-P. And this model is the simplest of the three because you just simply state fact, you support it, and you paraphrase your fact. So it's point, explanation, point. There's no need to persuade or convince anyone of anything or sell anyone on your idea, simply fact. So we often use this model for PowerPoint slides as a way to talk through each slide. And first you give the point of the slide in one sentence, that's your point, which ideally is the title of the slide. You explain the content of the slide, and then at the end you paraphrase the main point of the slide. For example, you're explaining a chart comparing our product to competitors. The main point here is our product line and marketing need updating, exclamation. As you can see from the chart, our competition is gaining on us at a frightening pace. Their cutting edge technology is better than ours, and their marketing strategy has been very successful. Point. So as you can see, our product line needs updating and a fresh new marketing approach. See, simple. Point, exclamation, point. And in this case, showing a graph, no doubt. Another example from one of my clients is an engineer at a high-tech company in Silicon Valley. And they were running all these tests on this system that they had. There was a problem in the system and they could not figure out what was going on. So it took them quite a while, but they did finally find out what it was. So his point was delivering this to the CEO. We discovered and fixed the error in the system. Bottom line, right? Explanation. We tested A, B, C, D, E, F under various scenarios, and after 20 tests in 24-hour time frame, we found that the problem was that D was failing to pick up the sequence in time. The final point, we fixed D, and now the problem is no more. When he explained this, I'm not an engineer, but I got it. I actually got it because he did let me know where he was going with it at the beginning.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it helps to have that roadmap of having your point or your position up front. It really helps your audience follow along with you if you start by saying, this is the key.
Yeah,
yeah.
It does. Good point. I like that roadmap. Yeah. Okay. So now let's have you practice that and give an example of some factual information, explain it briefly, and then paraphrase your fact at the end.
Okay. And once again, we'll give you a few seconds to think about it, type something, and then I will pick an example and share it.
Super.
We've got some starting to come in. Oh, here's a nice one. This is an example about missing a train connection. And if you've ever traveled by train with colleagues, you know sometimes it can be a bit like herding cats when something goes wrong. So here's an example and what you can do with it. So they say, we've missed our train connection to London. There are 4 other options for getting there. The first one is a direct train and it leaves from track 3 in 5 minutes. If we run and catch it, it will save us 45 minutes versus the other options. So let's run over to track 3 now and get to London. And then off you go. So that's perfect. You said, hey, there are other options, but the first one is this. Here's the fact. We're going to have to get there by X amount of time. Here's the advantage, and let's go. Hopefully, all your colleagues took off with you, and you made it to the train.
Excellent.
Oh,
yes.
wow. Cool.
Like that.
Good. So that's examples on all of them. Let's do a little summary now.
Okay.
All right.
So in conclusion, I'm certain that you will find the PrEP model and its variations, RPEP and PEP, to be extremely helpful and powerful tools to have in your communications toolbox. They work well for both spoken and written communications, by the way. Have fun practicing using them, and especially the PrEP model, a masterpiece of persuasion. So now what we'd like to suggest you do for homework or action plan in the future, before an important meeting or presentation that will be coming up, anticipate what questions you will probably get from the group and practice answering them aloud using the PrEP model. It's such a great feeling when someone asks you a challenging question that you already suspected and prepared an answer ahead of time. Another thing we suggest is create a 1-minute elevator pitch updating a project you're working on, and use the PrEP model or one of the modifications, RPEP or PEP. So if you run into someone in the hallway at work and they ask you about your latest project and how it's coming along, you can answer them, bam, 1 minute, you got it. So with that, I think I'll turn back to Arnie.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. That was great. And I would encourage everybody to practice the homework, particularly before an important meeting or an important presentation, think about those questions, because the more prep you do, preparation and prep the model, the more secure you will feel in front of your audience and the more likely you are to convince them. So definitely practice. It's great. And helps you also figure out where you need to bolster your arguments a little bit. Now, before we go into the Q&As, and we've got a nice list of questions that have come in, I did want to talk to you quickly about some special offers we have going for our webinar participants. So to take just a second, Cindy and I have written 2 books together. The first one, Prep for Success, is a workbook that's all about the prep model and its variations, gives you a little bit more background and some explanation for each of the 3 variants, and also multiple practice situations with suggested solutions. So if you want to get a little bit more practice, this is the book for you. And our other book, Professional Presence, helps you build your presence, how much metaphorical space you take up in the room, which is composed of, yes, partially how you speak, but also how you look and how you act. So the 2 books go together quite well, and webinar participants can download the ebooks from Fundamental Capabilities website for 2 for the price of 1. And then Cindy and I both do individual online coaching sessions around prep and multiple other topics. And we're offering 1 45-minute online coaching session with either of us. You can choose when you sign up, plus both books for half the price of a coaching session. So you actually end up saving more than the session costs. So we encourage you to definitely, if you really want to make your prep strong, get online with us for a session. All of our webinar participants, in addition, will get 10% off of one of our in-person sessions. So we do workshops as well. 2 of them are skill building workshops for leaders, one for women who are just coming into leadership and another for women who are quite senior. So you'll get a code for 10% off. And all of these codes will be sent to you by email within about a day after this webinar. So let's go back and talk about some of the questions, because there have been some great questions coming in, and I'm happy to see several of these questions have come in over and over, so I'm going to bring those out first. Cindy, we've had a request to just quickly recap. When do you use PrEP, RPEP, or PEP? Can you run down that?
Yeah. Okay, PrEP you use when you have simple state your position, support it with a reason, give example to support that, and then paraphrase your position. So that's pretty straightforward. You use the RPEP when you're anticipating your audience will be reluctant to believe what you have to say, or they're going to be antagonistic. So you just switch the position and the reason. So the reason I say that, let me tell you, blah, blah, blah. And then PEP is the easiest of the 3, just simply stating the point, explain it, and paraphrase the point.
Yeah, super. I think of them as, for me, PrEP is the basic workhorse of when I have to answer a question or make a request. I use RPEP when it could be an uncomfortable situation, either because I think someone is going to really object to what I'm asking for, or because frankly I don't want to answer the question. And PEP for me is really very much about presenting non-controversial information, just very factual, and I will use it a lot when answering a question that someone has raised after my prep. So find the different ways that work best for you when using any of the variations of the model, but that's a little bit how Cindy and I both use them. Okay, another good question here is, you mentioned engineers talking to engineers, or scientists talking to scientists. So are there times when deductive reasoning is better than inductive? And is there ever a time to lead with the facts?
Yes. Deductive reasoning, when you start with the facts, is the way to go if you're presenting engineers to engineers, scientists to scientists, because they're going to think you're being some salesperson if you start with the bottom line up front. It doesn't work for them. They want to have the justification before they get that solution, that main point there. So yes, depends on your audience. We go back to that. Analyze your audience. Okay, I need to go this way because they're engineers or they're scientists or whatever.
Okay, good. So that's where that audience analysis again becomes super important.
Right.
Okay. Then we have a question. So, how long does it take to prepare this prep type response? Can you use it in real time, or is it only when planning ahead?
You can definitely use it in real time. Matter of fact, the original way this is a media coaching formula that's been around for a long time. And originally it was for impromptu situations. So someone asks you a question and you're going, I've got the information in my head, but how do I get it out of my mouth in an organized fashion for that person? So that's swing in your head. And it really, really is very easy to do on the fly once you practice it. Once you keep practicing it in social situations too, not just in business. Okay, so yes, it's real time.
Yeah, it does take a bit of practice,
Yes.
but sometimes that means it's easier to practice it in social situations. If you're at a cocktail party, you can take a sip of your drink to organize your thoughts a little bit, but yeah, you can do it pretty quickly once you get going with it.
Yep, good point.
And kind of a related question. So, and that is, what's the right length for a prep answer? How long or short should it be?
Well, you should try and keep it down to 1 minute. And if you follow that rule of thumb, position is 1 sentence, reason is 1 sentence, explanation or example is a few to explain, and then paraphrase position 1 sentence. That helps keep it down.
Okay. And, I think another aspect of that to consider is people think that they need a lot of time to give an answer. But the first time you write out a prep, time yourself doing it. And this is particularly good for your elevator speech, time yourself doing it. And by the time you distill it down to just the key information, you may find you only need a few seconds. So go back to the examples that we used during the webinar. And some of those were really 10 or 15 seconds. And that's all it takes. Right? So it's a tendency we have sometimes to want to give all of the information. And that can actually confuse people and make it harder for them to say yes to you because they get lost in these little alleyways. The most powerful statements can sometimes be the shortest. So a good prep, 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah. And your example relevant to that particular person.
Exactly. All right. So here's another one a little bit related when we talk about, how much you have to say. And we've mentioned cocktail parties and awkward questions. And somebody's asking, is prep only useful in a work situation? Can it be used in your private life? Can it be used in nonprofits? How does that work?
Yes, definitely you can use it in all kinds of situations. And I tell my clients to practice it with their families even. I had one executive I was working with, and he was great. He really loved this model. So he shared it with his son, who was working on his master's thesis at university. And his son fell in love with it, he said, because when the panel asked him all these questions, shooting the questions, he would just go bam, bam, bam. He already anticipated, but he organized his thoughts so that he could just get it out in a nice fashion. So there you go. There's another case in point, it works.
Yeah, and I can give an example that just happened to me yesterday, actually, and it's a situation where somebody should have used prep, but didn't. Somebody contacted me from one of my alma maters, and they were looking for a donation, as universities often do. And I said, well, if I donate, what happens to the money? And then came 10 minutes of explanation. And after about the first 2, I was gone. I was trying to find a way to get them to stop. So if you're in a nonprofit and you're trying to get a donation, think about what that person is most interested in and where your efforts link most closely with them, and focus on that. And had this person really thought that way, we would have come much more quickly to the idea that I knew what I was going to be supporting, and therefore I was happy to give money, time, whatever it was. So you can really use it in any situation. Now, we're just about out of time here. Cindy, do you have any closing thoughts you want to share?
Well, I was just thinking on that note too, because I often tell my clients, ask questions. Like that fellow, when he was going on and on, he should have, before he started, just said, okay, so Marnie, where would you like your money to go to help us direct it? That would have saved both of you a lot of time. But asking questions when someone asks you a question really helps you narrow it down sometimes too.
Yeah, it's a little bit like on-the-fly audience analysis, except they're telling you the answers.
There you go, exactly.
They're telling you what you need to tell them so they will care. So,
yeah.
And, prep is super powerful that way.
Yes.
I'm going to wrap up. I hope everyone has taken something useful out of this. Again, congratulations to you for doing this as good use of your lockdown time. I'm going to remind you quickly that we do have our webinar participant offers going, and you'll have all the information in an email within about 24 hours. And thank you all. Wash your hands, stay safe, and go out there and prep. Bye now.
Yes. Bye-bye.